Joining us now, Virginia's now senior senator, Mark Warner. He is one of the leaders in the infamous Gang of Six. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, John. It's good to be with you again, and it should be an interesting weekend in Virginia Beach.
Oh, without a doubt, we're one of the people saying that the GOP has to do something because we don't think that things right now are working, and when you're getting beat by the margins they are in Northern Virginia, you have to look internally and start asking some of the tough questions, we believe, so we're certainly going to be asking them now. However, we want to go, if we can, right to the fiscal cliff. I want to get your assessment, Senator, on the proposal that that President Obama forwarded to the House Republican leadership on Thursday, basically saying he'd like another $50 billion of stimulus spending and tax increases. A lot of the Republicans said that it was a non-starter. What, in your view, do we have to compromise on in order to avoid the fiscal cliff?
Well, John, I think it's important that we all remember, and I'll do this briefly, how we got here. And I think it's important to remember both parties have some blame on their hands. If we go back over the last 12 years, and we've been running deficits year in and year out, 70 out of the last 75 years. How things got so much worse in the last 12 years was on a plain business proposition. When we did the Bush tax cuts, we took $4.5 trillion out of the revenue stream on a 10-year basis. And I think we could have maybe afforded that if at the same time we hadn't done 5 things on the spending side. And again, both parties supported these, so I'm not trying to cast blame.
Right.
But after 9/11, we doubled defense spending. We created a whole new category of government spending called Homeland Security. We went to war twice in both Iraq and Afghanistan, unprecedented in American history, totally on the credit card, didn't pay for a dime of them. We gave seniors a brand new drug benefit, prescription Part D of Medicare, and it's actually been a fairly effective program, but didn't pay for a dime for it. And in a way that's kind of what's driving a lot of this, and it's not a bad thing, because of medical technology and actually successful programs like Medicare and Social Security, we're living a lot longer, and the math on the entitlement programs just don't work. So now we've got this $16 trillion debt. We've got the expiration of the tax cuts coming at the same time of the worst kind of spending cuts, simply across the board, so-called sequestration, as well as 2 or 3 things that haven't gotten a lot of attention but could be equally bad. The so-called AMT, alternative minimum tax. If we don't patch that, 26 million Americans will have another tax increase on top of the Bush tax cuts. We've got the so-called Doc Fix. We've got a series of other tax policies that we extend only for 1 year at a time. So we've created this cliff that could be devastating to the economy. The president laid out his proposals. Now, and again, some of it's pretty aggressive, but I think what we've been hearing, and there's a lot of back and forth, is, clearly he's made the point that his top priority is to go ahead and at least extend the top 2 brackets, the top 2% of the so-called Bush tax cuts, or let those expire. And he said to the Republicans, give me something back in return. At least in a public sense, I've not heard any of the kind of response to that bid. He has, I guess, on Thursday put down, and I've not seen all these details, a request for some additional infrastructure and some other proposals. But the core here has been what he campaigned on in the campaign, the letting the top tax rates for folks above $250,000 expire. That over 10 years would put about $1 trillion back into the revenue stream. Actually, plans like Simpson Bowles and Gang of Six, which said let's do tax reform and bring tax rates down, did actually assume those top rates would go ahead and go back up, and we would base the reform off of those tax code that had the rates at the 39% basis.
So do you think...
Long answer, I apologize, but it's important to get... There's so much to this kind of, Washington code out there. I wanted to at least lay out for the listeners how we got here and kind of the state of play.
So do you think that ultimately the plan that the president submitted to the Republican leadership caucus on Thursday, do you see that as having legs, or do you think it's a non-starter?
Well, I think that I'm not sure. I don't think the Republican leadership is going to adopt it lock, stock, and barrel. But I think what he's trying to do is say, all right, here's our opening. Here's the president's opening. The speaker needs to come back with something. I mean, one of the things that has happened, and the Gang of Six, which actually was a group of 45 senators and 100 House members, equally divided, Democrat and Republican, built a lot upon the Simpson-Bowles proposals. There's an awful lot of folks in both parties who've got ideas of other ways and additions that might help this move along. But I think what everybody has kind of done has kind of stood down, because I think we all realize that at the end, at least the framework of this deal is going to have to come from the Speaker of the House and the President of the United States. And we're trying to give them the room to negotiate. Personally, I hope it moves along quicker, because each day that this potential cliff hangs out there, I think it robs businesses of more confidence in terms of hiring. And as we get into the heart of the holiday retail season, which is very important for our overall economy, people are going to maybe hold back a little bit more, because they're going to wonder what's going to happen on January 1st.
So, Senator, there are some that saying that if we do get a deal, that it'll be at the final hour, and then from what you've just said, that actually would not solve the issue of many businesses being able to expand or invest right now to take advantage of the holidays, right?
Absolutely, John. I mean, the sooner, one of the things, I was a business guy for 20 years. I have to tell you, I don't fully get Washington. We all know what the frame of the debate is going to be, why everything has to go down to the 11th hour. I don't think a lot of folks, particularly when it gets into Congress, fully understand the economic repercussions of this uncertainty. I think there are certain things that we could do as well. I mean, I think there's been acknowledgement that, and I've been very blessed to be very successful. I did that, a lot of my business success in the 90s under some of the rates we're talking about. But I think there are ways we could help kind of reframe part of this. If folks are going to be successful, are going to pay some additional revenues, we ought to maybe think about, using this not simply to expand government, but to go into a dedicated debt reduction fund, and acknowledge that folks who are doing this, they're stepping up and helping get our country back on track and get away from this kind of us versus them populism that sometimes permeates some of the political debate right now. At the same time, I think we're going to have to realize that even if we get some additional revenues, we still need to do tax reform, we still need to do entitlement reform, and we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on for those. Those are not going to all get fully done by the end of the year, but we do need to make some sizable down payments and show a real path so that we can try to, get rid of a tax code that currently is so complicated that you couldn't make it worse, and try to make sure that things like Medicare and Social Security will be there 20, 30 years from now, and the sooner we start reforming those programs, the better for the next generation.
For those just joining us here on the John Frederick Show, we're with senior senator from Virginia, Mark Warner. Senator, any plans to revive re-revive the Gang of Six?
We have continued to meet through the election. We actually got together at Mount Vernon for a couple of days to flesh out some more of our ideas. I think we've shared some of those ideas. We again still believe that the ball's in both the president and the Speaker of the House's court at this point. We stand ready to help in any way. We don't want to get in the way of those negotiations. I think they're going to have to get a framework, but I do think there are ideas that we can help once they get the framework, and when we get into the hard work of, okay, how do you make sure that we get a tax code that's fatter, flatter, and fairer, and doesn't have the kind of tax expenditures in it. One of the things I'm not sure your listening audience would realize is we actually spend more money in the tax code through tax deductions and tax credits and tax exclusions than we collect each year in our income tax. We spend about $1.2 trillion. We collect about $1.1 trillion. If we want to think about ways where we could, actually lower rates and generate some additional revenue, but we're going to have a full-fledged debate about some very popular tax deductions that Americans have come to enjoy.
And one of the things that we've said is that would seem to me to be not a difficult argument for conservatives to sell to their constituents, because one of the things that conservatives say is we want more freedom and more liberty and the government not involved. And wouldn't you agree that the various tax deductions and loopholes within the antiquated tax code that we have, that is basically the government choosing who's going to win, who isn't going to win, and certain segments over other segments of society, right?
John, I think in theory you are right, and I don't think it's just conservatives. As a business guy, I would rather have a more efficient tax collection system. I probably believe in that there is more public value in certain infrastructure and R&D and workforce training in certain areas more than some of your listening audience, but I think a more efficient system works. The challenge is, and I won't mention the individual's name, but he's a very famous American, very successful business leader and public figure who has been very supportive of major tax reform and getting this fiscal cliff fixed. And he was with me and a Republican senator the other day, and he said, guys, good work, keep at it. But by the way, if you really touch charitable, that's really going to hurt universities and hospitals. And if you really get rid of state and local tax deductions, a lot of people are going to move out of my state. So the rubber, when the rubber hits the road on things like charitable deductions, on home mortgage,
right,
on state and local deductions, on health care exclusion, but I think that's a healthy debate. That's the kind of debate that, where we don't blame each other, but we actually kind of air it out and let folks express their opinions. I think that would be healthy. And, and there are other ways. I mean, certain things even Governor Romney and others have looked at, that if you can't even completely reduce or eliminate, you can cap certain of these expenditures as a dollar amount, a percentage of your income, and still maintain the things that I want to see in the tax code, like progressivity, so that there is, I think, the fairness component.
Senator, if we could switch subjects for a second and go to the Benghazi situation as it relates directly to the potential nomination for Secretary of State of UN Ambassador Susan Rice. Many Republicans now saying they're just not comfortable with her as a nominee. I think one of the most damning statements to come out, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins on Wednesday said that she met with the UN ambassador. She was not satisfied with the answers. It would be tough for anybody to call Susan Collins of Maine a right-wing bomb thrower or anything else. She's a very sensible, moderate Republican. I guess my question is, do you feel that based on the statements after Benghazi that the UN ambassador made, that right now as a nominee for Secretary of State, that she is credible?
John, I sit on the Intelligence Committee, and so I want to choose my words carefully here. I think Susan Rice is a dedicated public servant. I think she has served America well at the United Nations. We have an investigation. 4 Americans were killed in Benghazi. We need to find out if mistakes were made in terms of security there and getting help to that compound in Benghazi. That has nothing to do with the so-called talking points. The remarkable thing here, and this is where and I'm looking at this, trying to find what some of my colleagues are talking about in Smoking Gun. On September 15th, at the request of the House Intelligence Committee, there was a request for declassified talking points. It wasn't Ambassador Rice that requested these, the House Intelligence Committee. When the intelligence community signed off on those talking points, they were shared with the whole administration. This was an evolving period as more and more intel came in. On the 15th, on 16th, she appeared on these shows using those talking points. By the 19th, there was more intelligence that had come in, and those, again, declassified talking points were changed. I don't see, and I have a lot of respect from my Republican colleagues who've raised, and maybe there are things in the private meetings with Ambassador Rice, but based upon the talking points and her speaking as, if she was using classified information, that would have been totally improper. When you go on these public shows, you talk off of cleared, approved, intelligence community declassified points. And I do not see the kind of hubbub that has arisen here. There's some discussion about what words were changed in the internal IC conversations. That is being looked into. But she was given a series of talking points, the same one that every other public official got, spoke off those points, and then 4 days later, as intelligence changed, there were new points put out. There may be things that would be raised if the president nominates her, which has still not been the case.
Right.
This seems extraordinarily premature to me. She continues to serve in a very difficult spot, as we know the UN, when we're all, I think many of us, I was very disappointed in the UN's vote on against Israel the other day. It's just, I don't understand some of my colleagues' enormous umbrage at this point.
If indeed Ambassador Rice is nominated for Secretary of State, as it stands now, would you be inclined to vote to confirm her nomination?
I've seen nothing that would disincline me at this point, but I'm going to, I would expect to have hear what my other colleagues have said in their private meetings, and I will give any appointment that the president would make. It's my job to review the record when it gets up there. But I think that's all premature. But the notion of how she's been kind of attacked so far, based upon all the facts I have, I don't see the validity of some of these attacks, personal attacks that have been made on her.
All right, we're with Senator Mark Warner, senior senator from the state of Virginia.